Welcome to this episode of Everything is Everything. And I want to say that don't just think of it as one episode. A Friday has come, an episode has happened. I think of this episode as part of a larger continuing body of work. In fact, even for the seen and the unseen, I often say that each conversation of mine is part of this larger conversation. I'll visit the same theme many times, look at it in different ways, and there'll be commonalities that will come up. You can see my thinking evolve. It's all part of this discourse. And similarly, this episode is part of a larger body of work that without really intending to, we are kind of building through Everything is Everything. Now, our first episode, which was purely about firms, was episode 22. Three firms that really surprised and shocked us in the way that they changed. But for me, we did two episodes on firms after that are really significant for me. Episode 34 about the evolution of family firms, and episode 37 about how you move from imperial to adaptive firms. Don't get scared by those adjectives. It's about how firms have evolved in India over the last 30 years and how they should continue evolving given the diverse nature of this country. And these episodes are important to me not just because the subject is interesting, but because there is novel and original thought going into this, where we are not just synthesizing stuff that is already in textbooks. Ajay has studied these subjects for many, many years, and a lot of what he has spoken about in those two episodes and in this one is actually, and you'll be too modest to say this, but actually in my mind it's novel thinking. It is a kind of scholarship that should be commonplace in our best universities, but unfortunately, in my view, a lot of mundane random stuff is studied there, and you need this kind of thinking that is both big picture thinking and also looking at the granular details of what this country is and the nature of firms and taking that story forward. So I want to come at you with a question, Ajay, to start with, that one, tell me about your interest in firms. When did it happen? Because you're technically an economist, you're studying the economy, you've had so many subjects that you're really passionate about. Why firms? And a larger sort of meta question, that when you begin to explore a subject, is it that at first you can't see the wood for the trees and your vision is just on the trunk of a tree, and at some point you begin to zoom out and see the entire forest and get a better picture? How do you think about stuff? How do you learn stuff?
The grand questions about India are those surrounding the growth. Okay, that can India emerge as an advanced economy with high levels of per capita GDP, with high levels of freedom, with the people blossoming into truth and beauty? There is no bigger project than that. Ostensibly, the field of development economics is supposed to be interested in that, but over the years I've just become more and more skeptical that the field of development has got lost into the interests of philanthropy and aid, and got stuck in poverty and redistribution and lost the plot. That the field of development economics has surprisingly little to say about the great development experiences of the world, which are the four countries of Taiwan, South Korea, Israel, Chile, who were traditionally poor locations in 1945, who are OECD countries today, in effect, meaning the OECD has not accepted Taiwan as a member, but for all practical purposes, Taiwan is a first-class advanced economy. And I somehow had the good fortune of not being concerned about the mainstream of development economics and always going after these questions from first principles. From first principles, this logic becomes extremely clear, and that is how firms bubble into view. From first principles, advanced economy is a country where there is high productivity, okay, because finally all countries have the labor, but the puzzle is you want the labor to do more per working hour, and that takes place inside firms. Meaning, yes, there are lone heroes like you who work alone, but by and large, most GDP in a country is produced in firms. So a firm is a coalition of sources of capital and managers and governance and technology and a bunch of contracts surrounding the firm, and it is all supposed to come together to achieve high productivity. So the journey of development is the journey of the emergence of high productivity firms. Okay, so roughly speaking, if a quarter of the Indian population was producing at the productivity of first world countries, we are done. That's the Indian developmental journey. Okay, and there are many very ambitious things contained in that one sentence. For example, only a third of the Indian working age population is working today. 2/3 are not. So there are many, many gotchas. But this sentence is factually true, that if a quarter of the Indian population was in firms playing at global frontiers of productivity, we're done. Then India is an advanced economy. And so that's a good framing of understanding the Indian development journey. The Indian development journey is about the emergence of a mass of firms that will suck in the labor to a sufficiently large magnitude, numbers count. You want to get millions of people into high productivity firms, and those high productivity firms should be very high productivity. They should get better and better, and they should ultimately reach to the global frontier of value added per worker. And that is the essence of the development journey. And I find it to be a great organizing principle. And in a way, you have read the book Kelkar and Shah. Everything we think about public policy is about asking the question, how do we create conditions where the wonderful people of India, the entrepreneurs, the managers, the financiers, the engineers, the workers, the creative people will all come together into sophisticated firms. So everything public policy can be understood as creating the conditions for this to happen. So getting to high productivity firms is the necessary and sufficient condition of becoming an advanced economy. And just to help gentle readers to see some of the contrasts, if you're Saudi Arabia or you are Qatar, you've got the high income, but actually you don't have the high productivity firms. So you're pulling gas out of the ground, or Saudi Aramco is pulling gas out of the ground and selling it to the world. You get a ton of money, but you actually don't get the knowledge. Actually building those firms is a human story. It's a human story of capability, of non-coercive human relations, where people will talk to each other, people will persuade each other, people will enter into contracts with each other. There'll be creativity, there'll be creative destruction. It's an entire human complex of high productivity firms that I see as development, not some bounty where some gas is found. That you don't actually change the people, you don't change the society. Capitalism is an ennobling force in the way it brings together people into voluntary contracts and double thank you moments in a way that is immune to racism, that is immune to all kinds of prejudice. Okay, George Stigler taught us a long time ago that the capitalist who discriminates against a chosen minority is actually harming herself. Successful firms are those that are meritocratic. They care about getting shit done. And so there is a wonderful progressive social character to great firms and to a country that is the crucible where great firms are created.
Beautifully spoken. You spoke of the human story, and I'm going to tell you a human story. But before that, a couple of things. One point that you also made is that this can set off a virtuous cycle, because when a firm is competing in the international market, it automatically gets better. Firms around it get better. You adopt best practices firstly, and then evolve your own, since you're really competing with the world. And it's a beautiful virtuous cycle the moment you actually manage to set it off. And the second point I want to make is that I had a great episode recently with Land Pritchett. We spoke a lot about development economics in that. And you have promised me, because I really want to do this, where we do an episode of Everything is Everything, where we talk about everything that is wrong with development. Economics is much needed for the world, because a lot of fine brains kind of get into that for the right reasons, with the right intentions, and they get completely wasted. My third story is a story that my good friend Vaishnav told me earlier this morning at breakfast. And the story involves his school, and the story involves a schoolboy who goes to the 5th floor of his building on a particular festival day, might have been Diwali, I forget, goes to the 5th floor of his building, and he does a very interesting thing. He has with him some mechanism, some kind of chain he's made, which have firecrackers at the end of it, and he's figured out this cunning way, which Vaishnav described very well, but I kind of forget the exact details, by which you can set off a delayed firecracker after 20 minutes, and you can time each firecracker. So using that chain or that string or whatever, he does this operation from the 5th floor, where there is a firecracker dangling in the 4th floor toilet, a firecracker dangling in the 3rd floor toilet, 2nd floor, 1st floor. right? And then at one point, they are timed in such a way that the fourth floor firecracker goes off. All the teachers run up to the fourth floor. When they are there, the third floor goes off. They all run to the third floor. When they are there, the second floor goes off. They all run there. Now, this is a remarkable story for me because the first thought that came to my mind when Vaishnav told me the story is that these are the future of our country. This is innovation. This is, you're taking the initiative, you're doing something funky, you're doing it in creative ways. Maybe it's cool, so you're doing firecrackers. But when you get the opportunity out in the economy, you can do amazing things. I did an episode of The Seen and the Unseen on Bihar with Mohit Satyanand and Kumar Anand, and they spoke about the incredibly innovative things that are happening there. Like an entire bridge has been stolen from Bihar. Think of the innovation. People just stole a bridge. One day there was a bridge, it wasn't there.
Only in Bihar.
Only in Bihar, and not and the bridge was stolen after what? It was stolen after a particular river was stolen. There was a particular patch which water ran through, and they kind of stole that as well. It's insane stories, and a lot of the big scams, these telemarketer scams and all that, are actually conducted out of a couple of towns in Bihar. And on the one hand, it's a bad thing, but on the other hand, it's a good thing. And the good part is in the potential. This is the potential our country has. We can compete with anybody in the world, right? We have the imagination, we have the sheer manpower. I mean, just the sample size of innovative people is greater than anywhere else in the world. And so I buy your point, and it is not a point of economics. It is not a point about companies. It is a poignant point about humanity, that as a country we are constraining ourselves.
And so the story is how to channel that energy and bring it together into these institutions that are called firms. Okay, and a firm is a raft of capital, labor, governance, technology, management, contracts. So outside of the firm is a bunch of contracts with external parties. And so that object should be put under examination, both from a practical point of view and a research point of view. In a practical point of view, we should be saying, what is the magic of ASML? What is the magic of TSMC? What is the magic of Sony? How do we build these firms? What makes this raft of human relationships, legal contracts, capabilities all come together? And then these are just things to admire. They work so well. They have very high levels of productivity. And as researchers, we should wonder, what is going right? What is going wrong? Why does the Indian environment not create high quality firms? How can the Indian environment change to support the creation of high quality firms? And that takes us to the kind of discourse we're going to do today.
So, the title of our episode is Graduating to Globalization, which is a title of one of your papers. It's a term coined by you. And we've been speaking constantly when, you've been sort of giving me notes for this to understand the subject. You've been speaking about firm I8N, right? So explain what is I8N, and then explain that what is that, the next further question.
There was a dark age when all computer science was conducted in English, and the Roman keyboard fits into 127 characters, and that is called ASCII. It's American Standard for Communication and Information Interchange, something like that. Okay, and then you had to do internationalization. You had to accommodate all the other languages of the world. Your editor couldn't just say that I work for English, I have to work for Korean and Japanese and so on. So the computer scientists were very lazy in typing. So they shortened the word internationalization into I18N. It is I followed by some 18 letters followed by N. So that's I18N. Firm internationalization is the broad idea that a firm becomes deeply connected into the globe. Okay, and it can take place in many, many ways, and we will discuss that. But the key idea, the key claim is that internationalization is good for firm productivity, and we grow better firms by emphasizing internationalization. Now, this internationalization can happen in many ways. They're called modes of internationalization. Okay, so a firm can use imported inputs. You now think we are in a full world of consent, no government coercion. By default, there are local inputs that are readily available that are often cheaper. So to use imported inputs is often an effort and is often something costly. And so when you drill into it, what you will start seeing is that highly specialized kinds of technology and services and arrangements become the imported inputs. Nobody is going to wantonly go into an imported input because it's a pain. So, you can even have a local dealer who will stock a Sony Alpha, which is fine, but it is still an imported input. And so the first mode of internationalization is imported raw materials, imported machines, imported technology. Okay, all this is a kind of internationalization. Then, of course, there is exporting. A firm exports goods and services. That is another kind of internationalization. But it doesn't end there. Then a firm can get foreign capital. So it can be foreign equity capital, which runs on a spectrum from low levels, which are called portfolio investments, to high levels that are called FDI, where in the limit, some foreign firm owns 100% of Indian organization, that's 100% FDI. Okay, so you've brought foreign ownership into the picture. Then there's foreign debt that you could be borrowing from abroad. Okay, there can be foreign employees. So once again, like, it's very easy and comfortable for an Indian firm to hire people locally. You hire from your friends and family. And yet many times, many Indian firms are taking the effort of hiring a foreigner. And this is interesting and important. The foreigners bring specialized knowledge, they bring specialized skills. Sometimes they have relationships that can unlock a market for the Indian firm. So there are many reasons why an Indian firm might like to hire foreign workers. Of course, at the back of it, we must retain our connection to the notions of meritocracy and bringing in the best people at every imaginable role. I remember Sundar Pichai once said that it will be a great day for India when a Bangladeshi immigrant becomes the CEO of Infosys. Okay, just as he, an Indian immigrant into the United States, has become the CEO of Google. And we in India are very insular. We are not ready for this. We will culturally resent a foreigner being the CEO of, the well-loved Indian companies like Infosys and TCS. But it is logically sound. You should hire without regard to nationality. That is a loyalty to building the firm. I want to build the firm. It's a high productivity firm. It's got to do well. And then we will do what it takes to make the firm good.
This is a lovely point, and actually, now thinking aloud, it strikes me that the fact that so many American companies have Indian CEOs speaks to the greatness of America, not India.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It is remarkable that today Satya Nadella at Microsoft and Sundar Pichai at Google and a bunch of others at the top ranks of the American firms, they are people of Indian origin, and in the United States they have been accepted. There is no difficulty, there is no friction. It's an ordinary everyday appointment process. Nobody starts shouting anti-foreigner.
And other modes of internationalization would also be outbound FDI, I'm
Yes.
guessing,
Yes.
and foreign technology using foreign tech.
Yes. So when I said FDI, I emphasized an inbound notion that IBM will build a facility in India. But imagine when an Indian company will go abroad and build a factory there, build a company there. That's also a glorious thing. And hundreds of Indian companies are now doing this. That is actually the subject of the paper titled Graduating to Globalization.
So here's my next question. When people think of globalization and companies playing in the global market, they often think of exports. And what you've laid out actually is a bunch of other modes of internationalization as well. So how does one think of exports vis-a-vis the others?
Practical people love exports. You think, hey, I got a foreign customer, and you think of it as an addition that, left to myself, I would have sold 100 and instead I'm selling 200 because a foreigner walked in my door and gave me an order. So exporting is well loved. To some extent, there's just a simple fallacy of composition going on here. What is good for one company doesn't actually scale to the rest of the economy. So what happens is a lot of firms start exporting, it will always push the exchange rate. Okay, when a country succeeds in exporting, the exchange rate moves, it appreciates. And then many imported goods will become cheaper in the country. And then foreign imports will kill off many Indian producers. So it is to some extent a zero-sum game that one man's export comes at the expense of harming other people's imports. Okay, and that's not a bad thing because we should reorient ourselves. The game is not to get revenues out of exports. The important point is exporting is passing a market test. You get to high productivity firms. So exporting it is truly great to export because this is the way in which we build high productivity firms, and it is proof that if my firm is able to export, then I am world class. That is the way to think about the joy of exporting. Somewhere in this, I want to add one more dimension to this. When a firm operates purely domestically, it may often encounter limitations in market size. So exporting is good for some firms because it enlarges the potential market. So then it takes you further into a journey of economies of scale. So that's one more reason why exporting is linked to productivity. So the highest productivity firms tend to become bigger, and the biggest firms tend to reap economies of scale and they become high productivity. So there is this deep connection between firm size and productivity, but when you pass the market test. If you are Coal India, you're a local monopoly, then firm size means nothing for productivity. Once you are a globalized firm, sheer size counts. If you are so big, it must mean that you're good. So, there is a direct connection between productivity and size. So it's one more dimension in which exports helps. But this is not in the crude way that a business person thinks. Business people are thinking one firm at a time, and at a systemic level, we are thinking a country at a time. And some economists have a phrase for this. They call it a Dutch disease, that when the Indian companies learned to export software, that pushed the rupee, that damaged Indian manufacturing exports. And yeah, that's part of life. So this is Ricardian trade theory working out. You will specialize. Each country will do certain things, and success in doing some things contains hardship for low productivity firms for doing the things that the country is not so good at doing, and you'll end up importing that, and that's okay. That there will be no large divergence between imports and exports. The divergence between imports and exports is not a meaningful number. It's just the capital import of the country, which are small numbers. So exports can be a very big number, imports can be a very big number, and they move together. So that's not the way to think about exports, that, oh, we will make money exporting. The reason why exporting is important is it's a journey to productivity, and it's also a way of solving political economy problems domestically. And this goes back to Jagdish Bhagwati, T.N. Srinivasan and Kruger. Okay, the political economy of a domestic business is fundamentally fraught with tension. If I'm a domestic firm, you're a domestic firm, then you and I are in a competitive game of getting state power to screw the other. Okay, I will try to get policy changes that will harm you. We will both collaborate on policy changes that will be anti-foreigner. I'll keep the foreigner out. I'll do anti-protectionism. Sorry, I will do protectionism. I will do nationalism. I will come up with every reason why the foreigner cannot be allowed to operate here, because then, you and I are the beneficiaries. But it doesn't end there. Then I will go cozy up to the government and inflict an income tax raid on you. Okay, so domestic politics is just very ugly. Firm to firm competition plays out into the state. And in a underdeveloped country, in a developing country, the state is not very good. So the state is available for business to send an income tax raid or a regulatory change or a regulatory order, and through that competitive dynamics plays out. And that's just toxic. So domestic companies and the path to success in being a domestic company and the kind of things that domestic companies do are just very dangerous, and it is not a gradient leading up to productivity. It can often be that the worst guys win, and the actions of the worst guys reinforce the toxicity of the state in a developing country. All these problems are pushed off the table when you say exporting. There is nothing that Infosys can do to try to lobby with the Indian government to get more exports into Germany. Okay, Infosys and the Indian state have no way to win in selling to Germany other than productivity. Like, shut up and do your goddamn job better. And that is just such a great set of incentives, that the entire passion, the entire energy of Infosys, of TCS, of the great exporting engineering firms of India is about how do I do my work better? How do I build a better ball bearing? How do I increase my productivity? How do I cut costs? How do I get the best machines? How do I upgrade my workforce? All good impulses, all positive impulses. So even in a bad country, the pressure of exporting brings out better behavior from the firms. The firms will do less by way of going to SEBI and RBI and Enforcement Directorate and income tax and doing ugly things to each other or lobbying for a favor that benefits me and always blocking the foreigner. Okay, so nationalism is the language of domestic firms. When you're a global firm, you don't do nationalism. When you're a global firm, in fact, you want cheap foreign inputs. So the whole logic of an exporting firm changes. And that is why exporting is so precious. So exporting is precious because exporting firms create that productivity. If you are a purely domestic firm, what pressure do you have? Competing in export markets forces you to become more productive, and that is the core development journey. But equally, side by side with that, at an early stage of development, we are a developing country and we have all these problems. We have a SEBI, we have an RBI, we have a Enforcement Directorate, we have an income tax, we have a government that is available to put out one more regulation, one more law that will favor one firm or the other and will always be available to be anti-foreigner. So you can get to a very toxic political economy. This is the journey of Indian failure in the 60s and 70s. And it was drawing on those insights that Jagdish Bhagwati, T.N. Srinivasan, Anne Kruger, and a whole bunch of others understood that exporting brings out a different political economy. Land Pritchett always pushes the story of the South Korean chaebols. Okay, like in a way you could say this is crony capitalism. But the beauty was that there was a political bargain between 8 or 10 big business houses in Korea where the government said, we will help create conditions where you will export. So the entire language became, how do we export? And there is nothing the government of Korea can do to make the American market more accessible or somehow better for the Korean manufacturer. They can't screw an American company, protectionism doesn't help, etc. So suddenly the entire channel of public policy goes in the correct direction. You go into pro-social, pro-productivity, sensible activities because your purpose is exporting. So these are all the ways in which exporting is magic, and I'm trying to show the deep connection that at the heart of development strategy is exporting. And exporting is a great way to rise out of being a developing country. Okay, like potentially you can be a purely domestic economy and you can learn high productivity, but the political economy is very difficult. In a purely domestic environment, you will get all this toxicity of firms hurling the state at each other. The state will always be dragged into one conflict after another. All regulation is social conflict and political conflict acted out in turning into one regulation after another, and it loses all meaning. Whereas exporting is a healthy way to focus. In all this, I just want to say there is one truly toxic way in which a country can produce fake exports, which is by directly subsidizing exporters. And this comes in two ways. One is in explicitly giving money to exporters, and the other is in distorting the exchange rate. So you can always make an inefficient firm export by sufficiently distorting the exchange rate. So if USD INR right now is at 80 rupees a dollar, just imagine it's 100 rupees a dollar. Okay, suddenly Indian goods are cheaper in world markets. So there are two toxic things that a government can do which will get you fake exports, that you get the motions of exporting without the actual content. The content is productivity. You're supposed to become high quality firms. When a government doles out a subsidy, which is like PLI, or a government doles out a indirect subsidy by distorting the exchange rate, then you've mixed up means and ends. On paper, you got your exporting, but you didn't actually get what it was all about. What it was all about was high quality firms, not the $1 billion of exports.
Beautifully put. This is turning out to be another masterclass. I'll get my recommendation for the episode over with right here. You mentioned Bhagwati. Bhagwati has this great book called In Defense of Globalization. So, magnificent book. Everyone should kind of read that. The other point that struck me while you were speaking is a point that Ram Guha once made to me in one of the 6 episodes I've done with him. I forget which one, where he spoke about the difference between nationalism and patriotism. Patriotism is just loving your country. You and I think I can speak on your behalf. We are patriots. We love the country. Nationalism is this particular toxic, exclusionary, chest thumping, macho sort of way of looking at the world, which is terrible. And a lot of the toxic role of the state in this context comes from that kind of nationalism, where a domestic country may say that block imports, put tariffs, protect me from competition, I want to continue to be mediocre. Or an exporting firm may say that, hey, I too want to be mediocre, but I also want to export, give me subsidies or manipulate the exchange rate. And I think what a true patriot will say is that no, that we have it in us to be as good as anyone in the world. Let us compete. We will get better, and we will show you what we can do. And that is an important distinction to
But
me.
there is an interesting difference between the 60s and the 70s and some of the things that we're seeing today. In the 60s and 70s, it was not a toxic nationalism. There were actually deluded economists who thought that import substitution was a good thing. Okay, so it was just analytical failure. And I think by and large that has been purged from professional economists today. Now you have other kinds of compulsions, and remember, the firms are always standing ready saying, yay, give me protectionism, I'm so happy.
Import substitution was indeed a disaster, poor thinking, and it is back. So, what are we to do the more things change, etc., etc. So, Ajay, from whatever I've been hearing so far, one particular thing that I like, and one particular thing that I like in your thinking in general, is that you won't speak of things in isolation. You'll see the bigger picture around it. No man is an island. No mode of internationalization, I-18N, is an island either, right? Everything feeds into it. Sure, exports are incredibly important, but these other modes are also important. We need a holistic picture. So give me a sense of why. How do the other modes of I-18N feed into exports, and how do they all form that virtuous cycle?
So many policy economists have tried to view these modes of internationalization as distinct and almost like a menu of choice. Do I want this? Do I not want this? Okay, he loves me not. That's the way they've tried to look at the modes of internationalization. The modern understanding of firms and firm internationalization says no, that is absolutely a wrong way to think about it. Let's go piece by piece. Step one, it is a beautiful and interesting, remarkable fact that production in the modern economy never happens in one country. A full 50% of global trade happens within firms. So firms are the key institution around which trade takes place. So firms look at the whole world as a list of opportunities. Where can I produce? And firms don't care about lines on borders. Okay, a wise firm, a smart firm, a sensible firm will not care about lines on borders. A wise firm will say, where can I produce cheaply?
Lines on maps, you mean?
Yes,
Lines on maps are borders.
Yes. Lines on maps.
Jagmug.
Okay. What a firm will do is they will ask the question, what are the efficient ways to get production done with an eye to lowest cost and also to diversification? So firms are sensitive that there can be geopolitical risk, there can be a political crisis in a country. So for example, China was on a certain journey with Xi Jinping, which just disabled the ability of a lot of global firms to operate there. And then these firms kicked themselves saying, oh, we are under diversified, we are too exposed to China. And they've all run around and trying to increase their activities in countries other than China. Sadly, not much has happened in terms of Indian gains out of this process. Firms plan their production activity all over the world. So there will be an engine that is made in Brazil, and then it is transported to Madras, and there the car is assembled, and then the car is sold in America. This is how modern firms operate. So the first point to understand is that all modern firms, or large, complex, important modern firms, are multinationals. They're not single country firms, and their very production process is spread across countries. And international trade is not across the boundary of the firm, is within the boundary of the firm to the tune of about 50%. So it just shows you how big it is, that if you want to harness exporting, you have to be deep inside the world of the MNCs. And that means you have to be fully all in on FDI. You can't say I have a problem with multinational companies. Okay, George Fernandez was obsessively irritated about multinational corporations operating in India. Our understanding of trade theory today tells us very clearly that you want to be a successful exporting company, you have to have multinationals and both sides. So Indian firms building operations worldwide, global firms building operations in India, and just remove all the frictions. Don't torment complex multinational firms as the Indian state does with income tax and complexities about rules of origin and a whole bunch of policy impediments interfere with the working of multinationals in India. And there I've already showed you how there's a deep connection between a mode of internationalization, which is FDI, in and out, versus exporting. The you can't take your pick. You can't say, I like exporting, I don't like multinationals. No, if you like exporting, you like multinationals. These are one of a piece. Okay, let's go further. Pause to think about the economics of a steel factory. In a steel factory, we consume pig iron or iron ore and coal, and we make steel. So, a primitive conception of the firm is that my input price is something I pay for coal. I will import high quality anthracite from Australia. I won't make do with the bad coal that we get from Bihar, international trade. Okay, I want the best inputs. And I will use iron ore, which comes from Orissa and Goa and other parts of India. And I'll put them into a machine. I want the world's best machines, imported capital goods, and I will make steel. Okay, this is an engineering conception of a steel factory. Okay, but a business view, an economics view will say that the most important input in making steel is the elephant in the room you have not acknowledged thus far, and that is capital. So if you count the capital cost per ton of steel, it's actually a higher cost than all the others. The components of iron ore and coal and labor are all smaller than the overall price paid to capital. So Mr. Capital is the most important input provider to make a profitable steel mill. And then you get to the simple calculation that if I want a steel factory in India to be competitive, then I have to match the price of capital experienced by the world's best steel factories in Korea or Japan or America. And so then that's where you open up to foreign capital. I need foreign equity capital, I need foreign debt capital. And we will not explain deeply here, but I just want you to take my word for it that foreign capital is cheaper, foreign debt capital is cheaper, foreign equity capital is cheaper, partly because India is a poor country, partly because India has a bad financial system. But bottom line, it is superior for most Indian firms to import capital. So you want to be productive, then you want to get the cheapest inputs. It is as silly to interfere with internationalized capital access as it is silly to interfere with internationalized coal access. Okay, we should be loyal to the exporting success of the firm, to the productivity of the firm. The firm must buy the cheapest inputs. Then don't have any ego problems. Don't bring any other considerations. They are all extraneous considerations. The only consideration is I want to win. I want to make steel in India. I want to be the lowest cost steel producer in the whole world so that I can put 100 million tons of steel capacity in India and export to the whole world and destroy the ability of a South Korean steel factory. Okay, that's the game. That's how you have to play. And then you can't say that, no, on capital, that's a mode of internationalization that I don't like and I will not accept. Okay, and similarly, foreign labor, like, look, we're going to build this great steel company. And if there are individuals who are really very competent, we should hire them. Like, the consideration of the nationality of the job applicant should be deleted in the HR database at the point of application. That we should look at all the resumes that come in and we should be purely meritocratic. That it is as wrong to not hire Muslims or not hire Dalits as it is to not hire South Koreans. We should just be completely neutral. I want a certain package of skills to be in my firm. I will pick good people who are available at a low price to get that job done. And then what has nationality got to do with it? Sometimes nationality can be a positive gain, that if I want to sell into South Korea, maybe I want to hire some Koreans because they have the requisite human network. So for certain job designations, you will have a description where you will say, I want 10 years experience of having lived in South Korea, of speaking Korean and selling into the Korean market. Now that guy could be a Tamilian, he could be a South Korean, and once again, we should be blind to their nationality. We should just hire the cool people. So bottom line is, all these modes of internationalization are connected and they feed into each other. There's a human story that is inside it. It is about human relationships. Finally, firms are a raft of people. And as the team goes out to the world to sell, then they meet the people who say, you know what, we know how to bring equity capital for you. And then their foreign shareholders and their foreign board of directors will say, you know what, we can help you make the connections to do FDI into Brazil. So all kinds of internationalization are interconnected. You get more foreign workers, and then suddenly those foreign workers are saying, you know what, we can buy this imported raw material from my country. I know a very low cost vendor and we'll import from there, we'll get a price reduction. So That way, we should think about firm internationalization as a larger phenomenon that is the core of the emergence of the journey of the flowering of the capability of a firm, but it involves all these modes, and all these modes feed into each other. On any of the 6 dimensions you push forward in one dimension, it will end up helping the other dimensions.
And I love how economics feeds into society, that in a truly competitive marketplace, it is costly to discriminate, and therefore you are much less likely to discriminate. But in a truly competitive marketplace, and
But exporting is that truly competitive marketplace.
exactly,
So the beauty
exactly.
of exporting is you have your back against the wall. It is war every day. You cannot be complacent. In a domestic market, you can rig the game by using government. So the arrogance of being a firm that engages in all kinds of bad practices is more within a domestic firm.
Exactly, that's a great point. And what I also like is, the point I was making, dear reader, at the start of this episode, that don't think of every episode as one isolated thing. Longer stories are being constructed. One of those longer stories is in all these characters in your head. In a previous episode, dear gentle reader, you met Mr. Gas. Today you have met Mr. Capital. Someone somewhere is solving a mountain. So, we are getting a sense of your interior landscape through this journey. So, Ajay, I'm going to get a little bit into role playing here, right? And I'm going to ask you questions which are framed thus. I am an X. What do I do? Given all the knowledge that you've just given. And the first of those is I'm a policy person. What do I do?
A policy person should understand the centrality of firm internationalization as a means to firm productivity, which is the heart and soul of India's development journey. So the words Indian development strategy, the words Indian growth strategy are not about poverty or education or health or all those things. Everything in the Indian society leads to firm productivity.
And the others are then taken care of if you solve this.
Or they can be an input into this. So, you do better
Yeah.
on education, it can help you because the firms will be able to hire better people. But it's a means to an end. And that story is firm productivity. Firm productivity is the touchstone that we are here to make firm productivity, and recognizing the limitations of an early stage republic. Okay, we are a young country. Many of our institutions don't work well. We should fundamentally understand the toxicity of the competitive landscape of domestic firms. That domestic firms will try to get ahead in ways that harm each other by using state power. Okay, so one domestic firm will get a regulation done that harms the other. That is the nature of domestic political economy. Exporting is a higher place. Exporting is a higher ground where those kinds of bad things don't happen, and exporting is a healthy thing. But the firms will always come and ask for subsidies. The firm will come and say, give me PLI, give me free land. Oh, electricity is so expensive in India, how can I compete? Okay, these will be the noises made by the firms. And I feel that the way we should think about it is every production location in the world has a mix of some costs that are cheap, some costs that are expensive. If you want to produce in Brazil, the labor cost is higher than India. Okay, you want to produce in Germany, the electricity cost is lower than India. There'll be many trade-offs, and the policymaker should smile at the firm and say, you choose where you will produce, what you will produce. Meaning, yeah, we should solve electricity policy in India. Okay, you and I have done a lot of thinking and talking about electricity policy, but we are not holding our breath. It's a 25-year journey to fix electricity policy in India. In the short term, it's not going to change, but that doesn't justify a subsidy. Okay, the firm should be told, this is where we are. Now you figure out how to produce. Either you should exit, like don't be in this business. Like you shouldn't produce electricity intensive things in India because like electricity is a bad input cost in India. If you're going to have a factory with 20 workers and 20 megawatt hours of electricity consumed every day, then you're probably not competitive in India. Then you want to be in Germany where you get cheap electricity. Okay, because if you have only 20 workers, there is no Indian edge. So the firm should think that this is my landscape. Now here I am. And if you have the fire in the belly, you become a successful firm, which is you figure out how to spread production all across the world. And you don't like electricity prices in India, go somewhere else. You don't like land prices in India, go somewhere else. There is nobody is going to give you a subsidy. Don't ask for a distorted exchange rate. So we should just kick the firms out of the room when they want a subsidy. Okay, that is the first block of things that policymakers need to do, that keep your eye on exports, but the firms have to fight it out. The firms have to become productive. Okay, then there is a whole toxic Indian government approach which is hostile to the outside world. There is just something deep inside the minds of Indian civil servants and policymakers, and that has become even more accentuated under conditions of populism, where foreign engagement is a bad thing. A foreign bank account is a bad thing. Travel abroad is a bad thing. Having a subsidiary abroad is a bad thing. Operating in a tax haven is a bad thing. And, having a Swiss bank account is a bad thing. Organizing your business activities through Dubai is a bad thing. There's just a fundamentally anti-internationalization stance spread all across the Indian state. So whether it is SEBI or RBI or ED or Ministry of Company Affairs or income tax or GST, this whole landscape is rich with an anti-foreign, anti-internationalization approach, to the point where many normal individuals and smaller firms will just say, look, let's be careful, let's not do things abroad, because then we have to deal with this compliance nightmare that these people will come after us. And that is part of how you get the largest firms in India that are richly international, and many others who just say, like, chodo yaar, this is too much trouble. And this is a policy failure. This is the Indian state harming India's journey. This is the Indian state interfering with the emergence of India. And this needs to change. It is a very important priority for policymakers that all these pieces, the enforcement directorate, the income tax, need to grow up and understand the modern world. They need to understand that 100% cross-border activity is the essence of firm productivity, is the essence of an advanced economy. Okay, if you fly to London, within 10 minutes, you will get a bank account opened. You suffer the misery of a foreigner coming to India trying to open a bank account.
And what strikes me about everything you just said is that it involves a state just getting out of the way and not doing things rather than actually doing something. You don't need to do anything. We are innovative, we are creative, we are entrepreneurial, we'll take care of shit if you get out of our way. But,
And then there are long run journeys that, can you do better on education? Great. Can you do better on health? Great. Can you do better on electricity policy? Great. But those are all 25-year journeys. They'll gradually play out. In the short term, they won't move the needle. But there is enough opportunity and enough energy and enough hunger in India to actually generate tremendous progress without waiting to fix all those things. Okay, look at TCS and Infosys and the other heroes of the Indian software industry. They didn't wait for the government of India to build engineering colleges where 1 million people will learn how to do programming every year. They just went ahead and solved their own problems. That is the can-do attitude which is there in India and which is required to get ahead. So waiting for the Indian state to fix electricity is not going to happen.
So two more questions in that format coming together at you. I am a manager, what should I do? I am an investor, what should I do?
As a manager, as an investor, as a board of directors, the strategic idea is do more firm internationalization. Okay, so in a way, every firm should look deep inside itself. Is my skill fixing the Indian system, or is my skill of being a competent firm? If you're a competent firm, look outside. Then you don't have to figure out how to operate in the Indian regulatory legal landscape. Just keep far away from the Indian state and compete abroad, which is in a way the playbook of the Indian software industry, of the Indian services exports industry. Just minimum interfaces with the Indian state. Don't go visit Indian government offices asking for this favor and that favor. And the thing is, even if you think you are clean, your competitors will hurl the Indian state at you. So it is better to focus on export markets. And so every firm needs to kind of think to itself, am I more domestically focused? Am I more internationally focused? So that's the first strategic picture, that being internationally focused is a good thing. You are de-risked from India. There will be ups and downs in India, but the world market is infinite. You can just keep on growing for 25 years by emphasizing the world market. So it's a very important strategic idea, that just push into the international market. If the thing you know how to do is actually run a business, then the world is the best market. The next set of things is, I think of this as a way of overcoming asymmetric information and principal agent problems. Principal agent problems. You're a board of directors, okay? You want to kick the management team, you want to kick the CEO and get them to do work. For that, you get to complex questions, and how do you define performance and how do you get at productivity? And the answer is, as a board of directors, as a shareholder, you should always demand internationalization. Give me more internationalization. Show me what percentage of your revenues are exports. Show me growth in exports. Then you're proving your productivity. Everything else, there can be ups and downs. See, in a domestic market, you're more vulnerable to the Indian economy. The global market is infinite. Your opportunity for growth in the world market is infinite. So all the modes of internationalization, board of directors and investors should use metrics around all the modes of internationalization, knowing that they're all interconnected. That show me exports growth, show me a bigger exports to sales ratio, show me your FDI, show me that a bigger fraction of your balance sheet is abroad and the sales generated outside may or may not directly be counted as export, but really it's your revenue. Okay, then show me success in accessing global equity markets and debt markets, and you internationalize your capital stock, get me cheaper capital that will feed into your competitive success. Show me more foreign workers. You should have more and more foreign workers, and you should hire in a meritocratic way. It's like if you didn't distort your hiring, you would get women, you would get Muslims. Okay, so like that. If you didn't distort your hiring, you'd have more foreign workers. Show me how many foreign workers you have. Okay, like that. Show me imported inputs. If you're only buying things in a convenient domestic way, maybe you haven't thought hard enough. Whereas there are highly specialized technical inputs that are imported. So these are all metrics through which a principal agent problem can be addressed, that owners and board of directors can put pressure on the management team, because these are the things that will pay off in the long term. If you play for quarter to quarter profit, you won't go after productivity in a deeper way. There are all kinds of things that can generate some gains on a horizon of some 1 or 2 quarters, or on the horizon of the employment contract of the CEO. Whereas these are deeper changes. If you have to push and grow exports, how many different countries are you operating in? Those kinds of metrics are very hard to fake, and they are deeply connected to firm productivity. So that is in solving the principal agent problem. In solving the asymmetric information problem as an investor, same issues. Do you know how to export? So basically think of the Indian equity landscape as firms that play in the Indian market, firms that play in the overseas market. The firms that play in the overseas market, you're fundamentally safer. You passed a market test. You know how to sell in an advanced economy. Okay, there is no market in the world more competitive than the European Union or the UK or America. Okay, prove it. Show me that you are able to go sell in those countries, then I know you're a high productivity firm. So you've ruled out the damage that afflicts many Indian firms, that actually it's hollow inside. The firm doesn't know how to do its work, it works pretty poorly, it produces badly. So from an investor's point of view, that's a great metric. Okay, you want to put equity capital into a firm, you want to put debt capital into a firm, just apply this simple metric. Are you an exporting firm? Exporting firms are better. Domestic firms, we'll have to see that have you won fair and square, or have you won by using state power or some other messy things? You'd have to think more. Whereas buying internationalized firms is an easier way to get closer to the capabilities of the firm.
A term I learned a long time ago, and I hope I'm using it correctly by thinking out loud here, is fast and frugal heuristics. That when a problem is too complicated, you find 1 or 2 fast and frugal heuristics to figure it out. And I'm just thinking that whether I am in a board of directors or whether I am a potential investor, and I want to know if your firm is on an upward trajectory, if it's in the right direction, if it is enhancing its productivity. And my fast and frugal heuristic for this is a level of internationalization. Because as you said, if you're competing in the global market, that is all I need to know. You're clearly doing everything right. Whereas if you're in a domestic market, it's so complicated that I really have no idea. Then I need to dig much further. But if you're succeeding in the EU, for example, then I know that, man, you've got a lot of shit figured out and you're going in the right direction.
Correct. Today in the morning, our friend Nitin Pai triggered off a conversation between all of us on these kinds of questions, and he had this interesting classification where the IT firms of India are broken up into 3 categories by him. Okay, the first of them is the old software services firms, the TCS, Wipro. The second is the software as a service firms who are 100% exports. They are product companies, they're software as a service product companies, are 100% exports. And then there are domestic firms. And applying this conversation into that, you're fundamentally safe and optimistic about the first 2 categories. That like, hey, you're passing the market test. You have an infinite market. There is no limit to how far you can grow. And yeah, it's going to be a struggle. You will have to compete with the best. But if the firm is already up and running, doing this exporting, getting growth, then everything is good. Whereas the domestically oriented firms, okay, you don't know, is it that they have blocked a foreign firm from operating? Okay, so for example, in the payments journey of India, PayPal was blocked from operating in India, and now you have a UPI monopoly. So is UPI actually good, or did you do it through protectionism? Who knows? Okay. Similarly, a lot of the Indian systems and regulations, whether it is a SEBI regulation or an RBI regulation or a UID AI or a UPI, I mean, there's a whole quirky Indian landscape into which there will be a more peculiar Indian solution, which some people will build, but then that won't go to the European Union, it won't go to the UK, because they don't do all these things. I mean, they won't have these kinds of SEBI regulations, RBI regulations, a government monopoly authentication system, a government monopoly payment systems. So a firm that is too deeply embedded in this landscape may not be able to figure out a UK landscape. So then it becomes a higher cognitive jump to become a player in the globe. So in a very perverse way, the peculiarities of the domestic Indian environment are harming domestic firms, because you can become successful as a domestic firm even if you don't cheat and get a SEBI regulation to support yourself. It's just that the nature of the business model and the technology that you build is particular, and then it's harder to take it to another country. So it's a very subtle problem where policymakers are creating dwarfs, that the Indian environment is just so unusual, it is so unique. The web of regulations and the other aspects of the government monopolies in India is then putting firms into a straitjacket where you learn deeply about how to operate in India, but then your systems and software are useless in Bangladesh or in Japan or in America, and then you become just an Indian firm. Then your upside is lower, you're more exposed to the Indian economy.
So my last question in that format, Ajay, is this. The format I'm an ex, I'm a podcaster, what do I do? I'm kidding. Don't look at me like that. That's not my question. I'm a podcaster, I will podcast. I am a researcher. What do I do?
Yeah. And this goes to the heart of development economics. So if you think development economics is about poverty programs and redistribution, then you're basically at the wrong end of the puzzle, and you are increasingly irrelevant to India's journey. So our plea to the researcher will be that you need to get your head aligned on the foundation. So what is the basics? The basics is an advanced economy is one where there are high productivity firms, and given the toxic political economy of domestic firms, the best way to get to high productivity firms is firm internationalization. And then suddenly there is a whole landscape to study. Okay, so we need all these papers. I've alluded to hundreds of subjects about productivity of domestic firms, productivity of internationalized firms, domestic political economy, about sustained profitable performance of low productivity firms who are able to lock up one market after another, the political economy of how you get a government law or a government regulation or a ED raid upon your rivals, and how domestic firm dynamics in India works. And then on the other side, firm internationalization. What are the causes and consequences of firm internationalization? So, for example, I already alluded to an idea that each of the multiple modes of internationalization feeds into and reinforces the other. So, can we understand these things? And then consequences, that do you get to that high productivity? Do you get to that growth? Do you get to that de-risking from the Indian business cycles and growth episodes? Do you get like a sustained long-term story? Is it good for investors? Okay, so there's just like dozens of questions in this landscape which calls for research that I claim is the heart and soul of Indian growth strategy, of development economics, as opposed to what many researchers are doing, which are, frankly, less interesting questions. And this is also an area where there are no randomized controlled trials, and I proudly take interest in this area and work in it, because I shall not allow my mind to be blinkered around one microscope. The point of being a researcher is to study important phenomena and make progress on figuring them out, and you don't have to be a RCT Nazi in order to figure out these things.
So, Ajay, first of all, I want to say that everything you said about RCTs, I couldn't agree with you more. Lant and I discussed this a lot in the episode. The kind of ridiculously trivial and often obvious questions that RCTs solve with very little impact on the real world are, ludicrous. Like, do treated malaria nets help? Do treated mosquito nets help? Prevent malaria and stuff like that. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if there's an RCT somewhere that two people perceive a yellow shirt to be brighter than a black shirt. That's the kind of rubbish they are doing. So if you are a researcher, if you care about this, if you have pride in your problem solving ability, don't waste your life and your intellect doing shit like this. Do real work that helps real people. Now I'm going to, with that little rant out of the way, ask you for recommendations. What are your? I've given my recommendations for the week. What are
I'd
yours?
like to recommend a bunch of research papers, okay? Many of them are from my co-authors and myself. Many of them are by other people. This is a great field. The field is opening up. So I'll make a reading list of research papers. And so not a book, but many, many papers. We'll have a group of papers, which is a kit of readings of firms, internationalization, sometimes other countries, sometimes India.
Yeah, they're there. They're there. I just saw them. So they're in the show notes, gentle listener. They're in the show notes. So yeah, so at the moment. So please check them out.